I never imagined that betrayal could look so calm, so polite. My son and daughter-in-law stood with their designer luggage at Nashville International, smiling like they were doing me a favor. "You'll figure it out, Mom," Tanya said, her tone as glossy as her sunglasses. "We only bought you a one-way ticket." And just like that, they stepped into the first-class lane, not once turning back. I stood there, clutching my worn-out purse like it held the last pieces of my dignity. No suitcase, no boarding pass, just a thin sweater and an itinerary that meant nothing. Around me, the airport pulsed with motion, rolling suitcases, echoing laughter, announcements for flights I would never take. People glanced at me and quickly looked away, as if my confusion might be contagious. Only hours before, I had been packing with hope. They'd called it a healing trip after my husband Jake's funeral. "A chance to breathe," my son said. 42 years of marriage, buried in a storm of rain and casseroles. I believed them when they said the trip would help me start over. I even sold my last set of pearls, the ones Jake gave me on our 10th anniversary, to pitch in for the flights. "Family effort," Tanya had said, smiling that soft smile that hides hard truths. But now, standing under the harsh airport lights, I finally understood. There was never a return ticket. I wasn't meant to go back home with them. I wasn't meant to belong. The airline clerk's voice still echoed in my head. "Sorry, ma'am, it shows your ticket's been voided." And when I turned for help, my family had already disappeared behind the security gates, absorbed into vacation selfies and first-class chatter. I sat down on the nearest bench, my hands trembling. My heart didn't break, it hardened, because I had been here before, decades ago, waiting for a father who never came back. Only this time, it was my own son who left me behind. I reached into my purse and felt the envelope tucked inside my bra, right beside my heart, the one with my lawyer's card Jake told me to keep for emergencies. Maybe that was that day. I straightened my back and whispered to myself, they might have left me with nothing, but not without a choice. What they didn't know was that the woman they abandoned at gate B22 was about to rewrite her story and theirs. Grief doesn't knock before entering. It storms in, claiming every corner of your life. When Jake died, it felt like someone had stolen the air from our house. 42 years of laughter, arguments, and quiet love vanished in a single Tuesday morning. One moment, he was humming off key in the kitchen, asking for the cinnamon, and the next, he was gone, his coffee still warm on the counter. People came and went with flowers and sympathy, but when the door finally closed, the silence grew heavier than any grief I had ever known. For weeks, I couldn't bring myself to move his slippers from under the nightstand. His toothbrush still stood beside mine, mocking the word forever. Then one day, Mark came by. He didn't stay long, just long enough to tell me that Tanya thought I needed a change of scenery. "Mom," he said, "we're heading to Florida for spring break. You should come. It'll be good for you. Dad would have wanted it." Those words hit me like a warm breeze through a cracked window. For the first time in months, I felt seen. I imagined beaches, laughter, maybe a moment of peace, so I said yes. I opened my jewelry box that night and stared at the gold wedding band Jake had given me on our 10th anniversary. He'd saved for months just to surprise me. I sold it the next morning to pitch in for the family trip Tanya insisted we were all sharing costs for. It felt good to contribute, to matter again. I packed carefully, folding Jake's photo into my bag, tucking in the soft blue sweater he loved so much and a paperback I'd never found time to finish. I thought I was packing for healing. I didn't know I was packing for heartbreak. When we reached the airport, Tanya's mother had priority tags on her bags. Tanya and Mark's tickets read first class. I didn't mind. I told myself love doesn't measure by seat number. But when the attendant said my return flight was missing, something inside me went still. I turned to Mark. His eyes darted away. We thought you'd like to stay longer," he said casually. "Stay longer? With no luggage? No plan?" And then Tanya, without hesitation, said, "Flights are expensive, Blake. You'll figure it out. You've got your phone." That was the moment something broke. Not my heart, but the illusion that I still had a family. They thought they left behind a helpless widow. What they really left behind was a woman ready to fight back. I sat frozen on that airport bench long after their silhouettes disappeared into the tunnel of gates. The air smelled like pretzels and jet fuel, and I couldn't tell if the trembling in my hands came from anger or disbelief. Around me, families hugged, children laughed, people rushed to board flights that promised new beginnings. For me, everything had just ended. I thought about calling someone, my sister, my old friend Jan, but what would I even say? That my son left me at the airport like forgotten luggage? I couldn't bear to hear the pity in their voices. I refused to hand them my humiliation as a story to tell later. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, not to call my son, but to look at a number I had saved years ago under J.R. Lawyer, Jake's friend, the one who had handled our wills and always said, "If you ever need anything, Blake, you come find me." I took a deep breath and pressed call. When J.R. answered, his familiar baritone steadied me. "Blake," he said, surprised, "it's been a long time." "I need to update my will," I replied. My voice didn't shake. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just a woman abandoned at an airport anymore. I was a woman taking back control. I caught a cab outside and handed the driver an address I hadn't spoken aloud in years, 287 Jefferson Street, Monroe and Wade Law Office. The city blurred by, strip malls, diners, old oak trees I'd passed 100 times but never really seen. When I stepped into JR's office, he rose slowly, older now, but with the same kind eyes. "Blake," he said, "I'm sorry about Jake." "I thank you," I replied, "but I'm not here for condolences. I'm here for clarity." He listened as I explained what happened, how my own son and his wife had tricked me into paying for a trip that was never meant to bring me home. His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, I said quietly, "I want them out of my will, every part of it." "Are you sure?" he asked. I've been more sure. For the next hour, we rewrote my future line by line, each word reclaiming a piece of my worth they tried to take. When I finally stood to leave, JR said softly, "You still got fight in you, Blake." I smiled. "No, JR, I've got freedom." By the time they landed in Florida, I had already erased their names from everything that mattered. That night, I checked into a modest motel off the highway, a place that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and second chances. I spread the new documents across the small wooden table and stared at my life reduced to paper, numbers, clauses, signatures. But for the first time in years, every decision on those pages was mine. The house Jake and I paid off, the farmland my father left me, the savings we built over decades of sacrifice, all of it would now go somewhere meaningful. I left everything to Elder Haven, a charity that protected older adults abandoned or financially exploited by their families. I'd picked up their brochure months earlier at the community center, never imagining it would one day save me. It felt right. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. Quiet, deliberate justice. Before I turned out the light, I wrote a short letter to accompany my will. To whoever reads this, you are not invisible. You are not done yet. Choose yourself. The next morning, I called JR again. "Scan the final documents," I said. "Lock the originals at your office. No one else gets access." He didn't hesitate. "You've got it, Blake." Then I went to the bank, opened a safety deposit box in my name, and updated every contact form that still listed Mark. When the teller asked, "Would you like to add a family member?" I smiled softly. "No," I said, "just me." Those 2 words, just me, no longer felt lonely. They felt powerful. A week later, I returned home one last time. I'd hired movers from a different town to avoid gossip. I only wanted a few things: Jake's favorite reading chair, our wedding album, my mother's quilt, and the navy cap he wore on fishing trips. The rest, furniture, dishes, photographs, no longer felt like mine. As the movers worked, I walked through each room saying silent goodbyes. The kitchen, where we danced barefoot, the hallway where Jake fell, the window where I'd watched the rain the morning he died. I left the house keys on the counter with a note. "Don't call, don't ask. I am exactly where I want to be." Then I walked out and didn't look back. 2 hours later, I arrived at Willow Grove Independent Living for Seniors with Dignity. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. Someone held the door open for me and said, "Welcome home, Mrs. Monroe." And for the first time in years, it felt true. But what they didn't know was that my new home wasn't just a fresh start. It was built on the inheritance they thought would be theirs. 6 months passed like sunlight filtering through lace curtains, quiet, slow, and golden. At Willow Grove, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace that didn't ask for permission. Mornings began with tea and laughter at the book club. Afternoons were watercolor classes in the courtyard, the kind of soft joy Jake would have loved. Evenings hummed with gentle jazz and voices that said my name with warmth, not obligation. No one here looked through me. They looked at me. Here, I wasn't a burden. I wasn't the forgotten mother. I was Blake. Reader, painter, storyteller, alive. Then, one morning, the email came. Subject: letters delivered. JR's message was short. Everything has been finalized. By noon, my phone started buzzing, Mark's name flashing, again and again. 16 calls in one day. I didn't answer a single one. By nightfall, an email arrived. Subject: I'm sorry, Mom, but at least let us keep the garden. Mom, I don't know what to say. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Maybe we handled things wrong. Maybe Tanya shouldn't have said what she did. But this, removing us from everything, the house, the land, even the joint account, that's too far. At least let us keep the garden. The kids helped plant it. Please, just one call, 5 minutes. Mark. I read it once, then again, and smiled. We didn't think you'd actually go through with it. That line told me everything. They thought I was too soft to draw a line, too desperate to stay included. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. And now they were stunned that the same woman they'd left at gate B22 had the strength to leave them out of her future. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the community library and sat beside my friend Helen. She glanced at me and said, "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The one people wear after they finally tell the world who they are." I smiled. Maybe I just did. Later that evening, I wrote in my journal, "Some things are inherited, others are earned. And peace, you create that from scratch." I thought of Jake,
of everything we'd built, everything I refused to let be taken through manipulation and guilt. They thought I'd crumble without them, but they were the ones who lost something priceless. My trust, my love, my name in their story. Now, when I walk through Willow Grove's garden, the one I helped fund through Elder Haven's program, I feel Jake beside me. The flowers bloom where my pain once lived. They left me at an airport with nothing. I found myself and built a legacy that will never leave anyone behind again.
The air at Willow Grove always smelt like jasmine after rain. Every morning, sunlight spilled through my curtains as if the world itself was welcoming me back. Life had slowed, softened, but I hadn't stopped living. I'd started becoming. The first month felt like waking from a long sleep. I joined a writing group, picked up my brushes, and painted the courtyard's rose bushes, each petal a reminder that beauty could grow even after betrayal. There were people here who didn't want anything from me except my company. They remembered my name. They listened when I spoke. They laughed when I laughed. At dinner, someone always saved me a seat. That's what love looks like when it's genuine. No performance, no guilt, no debt to pay. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about Mark and Tanya, not with anger, but with a strange kind of peace. I'd stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I no longer replayed their words at the airport. Instead, I replayed mine. "You'll figure it out, Mom." And I had. One afternoon, Ruth from art class asked, "Do you ever regret it, cutting them off like that?" I smiled. I regret not doing it sooner. Because that's the truth most people never say out loud. Sometimes freedom comes after the final goodbye. That night, I lit a candle beside Jake's photo. He looked as he always did, mid-laugh, mid-life, full of warmth. They thought they broke me, love, but they built me instead. Outside, the courtyard lights shimmered against the glass, and I realized something Jake once told me was finally true. Everything you plant won't grow, but what does, that's yours. Now when I walk through the garden that Elder Haven built on my land, I see other women, strong, gray-haired, still standing tall, finding peace where my pain once lived. We share stories, not sadness. We don't whisper about the past. We speak it clearly, and it loses its power. I've learned that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who stands beside you when the storm hits. Here at Willow Grove, I found that family. I may have been left behind at an airport, but I walked out of that terminal with something far more valuable than a ticket home: my dignity. They thought the story ended when they walked away, but it was only the beginning. This peace, this strength, this rebirth is what happens when a woman decides she's not disposable. She's divine. She's home. Even now, there are quiet evenings when I sit by the window of my room at Willow Grove and listen to the wind play with the chimes outside. They sound like forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. For the years I spent believing that love meant enduring anything, even cruelty disguised as care. I've stopped checking my phone for their names. The calls have slowed, then stopped altogether. Maybe they've accepted it. Maybe they're still telling their own version of the story. Either way, it no longer belongs to me. My story isn't about being left. It's about what I found after. I found strength in solitude. I found grace in grief. I found that peace is something you build, brick by brick, when you finally stopped asking to be chosen. Helen jokes that I should write a book about it, the woman who outgrew her family. I tell her, maybe I already have. Because every letter, every donation, every woman who steps into Elder Haven's new program on my land, they're the pages of that book, living proof that pain can plant gardens if you give it enough light. Sometimes, new residents arrive here, tired faces, trembling hands, eyes that have seen too much loss. I see myself in them. I sit beside them during lunch, tell them they're safe now, that nobody here expects them to prove their worth. Some cry, some laugh, all begin again. That's the legacy I wanted. Not money, not monuments, but moments like these. I think about Jake often, not with sorrow anymore, but with gratitude. His laughter still lingers in the back of my mind like a song you never forget. I know he would have been proud, not just of what I rebuilt, but that I rebuilt at all. One night, under the glow of the courtyard lamps, I whispered into the stillness. They thought they'd written the ending, but I'm the author now. I smiled, because that's what survival looks like. Not revenge, not bitterness, just truth spoken out loud and owned completely. So if anyone ever asks what happened to Blake Monroe, tell them this. She was left at an airport. She lost her family. And then she found herself. Because when a woman stops waiting for someone to save her, she doesn't just survive. She becomes her own rescue story.
It's strange how a story can outgrow the person who lived it. What started as my private heartbreak, one woman left behind at an airport, began to ripple outward in ways I never expected. At Willow Grove, my story spread through whispers first, then through courage. Women began to share their own versions, left by children, forgotten by siblings, dismissed by the very people they once carried through life. We began meeting on Thursdays, in the sunroom that smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. We called it the Second Chapter Circle. Every week, one of us would read something, a letter, a poem, or just a page from a life we were ready to reclaim. We didn't cry for pity anymore. We cried because we finally felt seen. Helen brought cookies. Ruth kept a notebook where she wrote down our favorite quotes. "We could publish this," she said once, half joking. But then JR came to visit, checking in about the Elder Haven partnership. When he heard about our meetings, his eyes softened. "You know," he said, "this could help more women than you think." A few months later, Elder Haven launched a new initiative, Grandma True Stories, a project that collected real voices of women like me, women who had been written out of their own families but refused to disappear. They recorded our stories, raw and unpolished, and shared them online. The world listened. Thousands of messages began to arrive, from daughters who regretted, from grandmothers who related, from strangers who said, "Thank you for reminding me it's never too late to begin again." I never wanted fame, but seeing my story turn into hope for others felt like redemption itself. The words that once carried my pain now carried power. Some nights, I walked the garden paths at Willow Grove, watching the younger volunteers from Elder Haven plant new flowers. One of them asked me recently, "Mrs. Monroe, do you ever miss them?" I paused. I miss who I thought they were, but I don't miss who they showed me they became. The girl nodded. "You're really strong," she said. I smiled gently. "No, dear, I'm just finally free." As I returned to my room, I glanced once more at Jake's picture. He'd probably laugh if he saw how far this story traveled from one woman's silence to a movement for every forgotten soul. Because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't anger. It's peace so powerful, the whole world hears your silence. Years have passed now. The seasons turn slower at Willow Grove, or maybe I just notice them more. I wake up to the sound of birds outside my window and the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the common room. My hands are older, softer, but steadier than they've ever been. Because for the first time in a lifetime, they only hold what belongs to me. Peace. The garden outside has grown into something sacred. Elder Haven visits often, bringing new residents to see where it all began. This is the Monroe Garden, they tell them. And though I never asked for that name, I don't correct them. It's fitting, I suppose, not for vanity, but for meaning. It's a place where things once broken learn to bloom again. Sometimes I sit on the same bench where I first met Helen and Ruth and think about how far one act of courage can travel. What started as my small rebellion against cruelty has become a quiet revolution for women who were told their stories were over. They come here to find beginnings. A letter arrived last month, handwritten with no return address. Inside, a single line. I hope one day you can forgive me. M. I didn't need to wonder who it was from. I folded the note neatly and tucked it into my journal between the pages marked closure and grace. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something you give to erase the past. It's what you grant yourself, so the past stops living rent-free in your heart. When the evening sun dips low, I light the same candle I used to for Jake. The flame flickers, reflecting in the glass of his photograph, and I whisper, "We made it, love. Maybe not the way we planned, but better." He always said legacy wasn't what people remembered you for, but what they remembered you by. I think he'd be proud to know my legacy isn't a will or a house or a bank account. It's the women who walk through the garden and whisper to themselves, "I'm not done yet." So if someone ever asks how the story of Blake Monroe ends, tell them it doesn't. Tell them it keeps growing in every woman who chooses herself, in every heart that refuses to settle for being forgotten. Because this isn't just my ending, it's an open door for anyone brave enough to step through it. They left her at an airport with nothing. She built a world where no one would ever be left behind again and called it home.
Morning sunlight spills across my writing desk, glinting off the rim of my teacup. I've come to love these quiet hours when the halls of Willow Grove are still and the world feels wide enough for memory to breathe. Some days I reread the letters we've received from women across the country, letters from those who walked through their own airports, their own goodbyes, their own rebirths. They all start the same way. I thought I was alone. And they all end the same way. But then I heard your story. It amazes me still how something born from pain became a bridge of connection. Grandma True Stories has grown beyond anything I imagined. Volunteers record voices, college students transcribe them, and libraries archive them. Entire generations now hear the stories of women who refuse to fade quietly into the background. Sometimes, during our meetings in the sunroom, I watch the younger visitors, wide-eyed, listening, and I realize this is what healing looks like when it multiplies. Not just surviving, but teaching others how to rise too. I used to wonder if my son ever drives by the old house, if he sees the new sign in the yard, Elder Haven Therapeutic Garden, dedicated to resilience and renewal. Maybe he slows down for a moment. Maybe he doesn't. But I no longer feel anger when I imagine it. The past doesn't sting anymore. It simply exists like a chapter already read. One evening, I walked past the mirror near the courtyard doors and paused. The woman staring back wasn't fragile anymore. The sadness that once shadowed her eyes had softened into something else, strength tempered by peace. I realized then that I had become what I needed most all those years ago, my own safe place.
The world outside may never know my name beyond the story that started it all. And that's fine. Because the truth is, stories aren't meant to be owned. They're meant to be shared, to remind others that even the smallest voice can echo forever. I picked up my pen and wrote the final line in my journal. This isn't goodbye. It's a thank you to the woman I became when no one came back for me. Then I closed the book, smiled at the silence, and whispered, "The gate is closed, but my heart is open." Because when the world forgets your worth, the bravest thing you can do is remember it yourself.